Montana Territory, 1883. The wind came down from the mountains sharp with snow, and Georgia Dale pulled her coat tighter as her boots crunched through the frozen dirt of the long, winding trail. She was tall, too tall, folks always said back in Kansas, tall enough that men looked and then looked away. Tall enough that women whispered behind fans and mothers warned their sons not to bother. She had walked 5 miles already, her long legs carrying her across the open country toward the only place she had left to try. A ranch nestled under the ridgeline, smoke rising from its chimney and a corral full of restless horses pawing at the frostbitten ground. Her gloves were torn, and her last coin had bought a half loaf of bread 2 days ago. Georgia squared her shoulders and stepped up onto the porch. Her breath came out in white clouds as she raised her hand and knocked. The door opened before the echo faded. A tall cowboy stood there, shoulders broad and rough from years of ranch work. His jaw was lined with stubble, his shirt sleeves rolled up despite the cold, and his dark hair curled just slightly at the ends. But it was his smile, warm, slow, and real, that made her breath catch. "Afternoon," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "You lost, miss." "No," she said, her voice cracked from cold and nerves. "I heard you might be hiring hands." He looked her up and down, not with judgment, but with something steadier, respect, curiosity, and not a hint of mockery. "I might be," he said. "Name's Cooper Jennings. This here's my place. You ride." "I can ride, rope, and shoe a horse," Georgia said. "I can cook, clean, and mend fences. My father ran a ranch in Kansas before he passed. I've worked since I was 12. Cooper nodded once, like that settled it. "Then you have a job," she blinked. "Just like that," he shrugged. "You knocked. You asked straight. I like that." Georgia let out a breath she had been holding for weeks. He stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in." "It is too cold for standing around." The warmth of the ranch house hit her the second she stepped inside. A fire blazed in the stone hearth, and the scent of stew hung in the air. The place was tidy, worn but cared for. She noticed 2 small boots by the door and a stuffed rabbit sitting on a chair. "You have children?" she asked. Cooper's expression shifted, something tender moving behind his steady gaze. "I do, too. Bonnie and Ben. Their mother passed almost 3 years back now. Been just me and them since." "I am sorry," Georgia said. He nodded once. "Thank you." Just then, a little girl peeked around the hallway corner. She had tangled dark hair and wide eyes the same shade as her father's. "Papa," she whispered. "Who is that?" "This is Miss Dale," Cooper said gently. "She is going to help us here on the ranch." Bonnie stepped out from behind the wall, holding her brother's hand. He was smaller, maybe 3 years old, with chubby cheeks and a thumb in his mouth. Georgia knelt. "Hello there," she said softly. "Nice to meet you both." Ben hid behind his sister's skirt, but Bonnie smiled, shy and curious. "You are tall," Georgia laughed. "That I am." "You are taller than Papa," she said. Georgia glanced up at Cooper, who was watching the moment with something unreadable in his eyes. Then he spoke. "They will warm to you fast," he said. "You have a way about you." That night, Georgia was given the spare room and a warm meal. After the children were asleep, she helped Cooper bring in firewood. The silence between them was easy, unhurried. When their hands brushed over the last log, she felt it something different than duty or kindness. Something quiet and steady, like a seed planted deep. He looked at her as they stood in the doorway, snow falling outside in soft flurries. "You are not what I expected when I opened that door," he said. "What did you expect? Someone running from something, or someone looking to take?" "I did not come to take," she said. "I know," he said. "That is why I smiled." The next morning she woke before the sun and joined Cooper in the barn. They worked side by side, saddling horses, hauling hay, fixing a busted latch on the chicken coop. He taught her the layout of the land, and she picked it up quick. Her height, once a mark against her, helped her reach the high beams and lift heavy gear without strain. The days passed fast. She made the children laugh, taught Bonnie how to braid leather, and sang to Ben when he could not sleep. Cooper watched her, always watching, his gaze steady and full of something growing. One afternoon, as they rode the fence line together, he reined in his horse and looked at her. "You ever think about settling down?" he asked suddenly. She frowned. "I tried once, back in Kansas. A man there said he liked me, until his mother told him I looked like a man in a dress." Cooper's jaw tightened. "He was a fool," she shrugged. "It is just how it has always been." Silence stretched between them. "I do not see a man when I look at you," he said finally. "I see a strong woman with grit in her bones, the kind that does not break easy." Georgia looked at him, really looked, and her heart skipped. His words were not just kind, they were honest. Back at the house, as the light faded and the children played near the hearth, Cooper handed Georgia a cup of coffee. Their fingers touched again, and this time neither of them pulled away. "You are not just good help," he said quietly. "You are good for this place, for them." "For me," she met his eyes. "I never thought I would belong anywhere again." "You belong here," he said. That night, as the wind howled outside and the fire crackled low, Georgia lay in her bed and smiled into the dark. She had knocked on a stranger's door, expecting nothing more than a cot and a day's work. But the cowboy had smiled, and in that smile was the start of something she had never dared to hope for. By mid-December, the gray skies held low over the valley, and the snow came steady, quiet as breath. Georgia rose before dawn, lit the kitchen stove, and stirred cornmeal mush with the back of a wooden spoon. The children still slept, curled beneath quilts Cooper's late wife had pieced together from worn shirts and flour sacks. Georgia never stepped into that room unless Bonnie or Ben called her. She understood some places held echoes that weren't hers to disturb. That morning, Cooper came in from the barn with his coat dusted in frost and a faint limp in his right leg. "You're favoring that side," Georgia said, not looking up from the pot. "Old break. Mule kicked me years ago. Cold sets it aching now and then. You want willow bark tea for it." He leaned against the doorframe, rubbing the joint just above his boot. "You know about that. My mama was half Choctaw. Her mother taught her. I listened." He tipped his head in a quiet nod. "I'd take that tea. If you've the time." "I've always got time for pain that don't show." Cooper didn't answer, but his gaze stayed on her a long moment before he stepped out again. Later, while the children napped, Georgia pushed through the wind and gathered the bark from the stand of willows along the creek. Her fingers worked raw, but she didn't mind. The cold cleared her thoughts, and the silence let her breathe deep. She returned with her pockets full and the beginnings of a plan forming. That night, she boiled the shavings and set the cup down next to Cooper's plate. He tasted it, said nothing, but drank it all. "You ever think about going back?" he asked, his voice low and steady. "Back where? Kansas?" "No," she said. "There's nothing left behind me. You got someone still living. An older brother in Dodge, but he's got a family and a business. Doesn't think much of a woman who works with her hands." Cooper ran a thumb along the rim of his cup. "He ever help you?" She looked at him across the flickering lamplight. "He told me I'd never be anyone's first choice." Cooper didn't look away. He was wrong. She wanted to say something, but Ben stirred in his sleep just then, and the moment passed. Over the next weeks, Georgia settled deeper into the rhythms of the ranch. She built a cradle for the new calf with leftover slats from the old hay wagon. She showed Bonnie how to stitch patches on her apron without bunching the fabric, and when the girl asked if she could learn to ride proper, Georgia didn't hesitate. They started in the small pasture, Georgia walking beside the pony, Bonnie upright in the saddle with her hands clenched tight. You don't have to grip so hard, Georgia said. The horse knows you're there, Bonnie frowned. But what if I fall? Then I'll catch you. The girl's mouth pressed into a line, but she nodded. From the barn, Cooper watched the whole lesson, his arms folded, his mouth unreadable. When Bonnie finally trotted without help, he gave a single nod, then turned back inside. That evening, as Georgia brushed mud from her boots, Cooper came to stand beside her by the porch rail. I ain't seen her that sure of herself since before, his voice caught. She used to be real quiet. She's got grit, Georgia said. Just needed someone to say it. You talk to her like she matters. She does. He looked at her then, and not just as a man might look at a woman, but like a man who sees every inch of what she's carried and still wants to draw closer. You make this place feel full again, he said. Georgia turned to face him. You think I'll stay? I'm hoping you will. She didn't answer right away. The cold wind moved through the cottonwoods, and somewhere down by the creek, a coyote called. I've never felt needed like this, she said at last. Not like something worth keeping. He reached out, slow and careful, and brushed a fingertip along the back of her hand. You are. She didn't move away. Inside, the children laughed in their sleep. The fire crackled, and for the first time in years, Georgia felt the quiet beginning of a home. The thaw came slow that year. By late March, the snow had pulled back from the lower fields, leaving behind stretches of sodden earth and the smell of old grass waking beneath it. Georgia stood at the edge of the pasture, hat low against the wind, watching the herd nose through the muddy swall for what little green had begun to push through. Cooper joined her, his boots sinking into the soft ground beside hers. He didn't speak right away. The quiet between them had grown easy, like a fence built solid between two trusted hands. You ever break colts? He asked, his eyes on the young buckskin pacing the far side of the pen. A handful, she said. My father had a way with them. Said you don't win a horse by showing it who's boss. Said you listen with your body and answer with your hands. Cooper gave a slow nod. That's how I do it too. They didn't move for a while, just stood watching the colt test the limits of the fence. Then Cooper turned to her. Got a buyer coming from Helena in a week. Wants to see what we've got coming up. I can ride him out, Georgia said. If he's ready. You're sure? She met his gaze. He's not mean, just doesn't know what to trust yet. Back at the barn, Georgia worked the colt slow, never rushing. She moved in silence except when she spoke to him in low tones, words more for rhythm than meaning. Cooper leaned on the rail and watched, his arms folded, saying nothing unless asked. The colt settled under her hand quicker than expected, and by the 5th day she had him saddled and walking a circle without fight. That night, as she brushed straw from her skirt on the porch, Cooper handed her a tin cup filled with warm cider. Your hands, he said. They're raw. They'll toughen. You've done more in a month than most ranch hands manage all spring. She didn't answer right away. The sky above them was thick with stars, the kind that looked close enough to touch. She wrapped both hands around the tin, letting the heat seep in. You want the truth, she said finally. I thought I'd end up patching clothes and keeping to myself. I didn't expect to ride again, didn't expect to feel like I mattered. Cooper's voice was quiet. You matter plenty. She looked over at him, unsure of what showed in her face, but he didn't flinch from it. His expression was steady, softened only slightly by the lantern glow from the window behind them. You miss her? She asked. Your wife. He lifted his eyes to the horizon where the last sliver of light was fading. I do, he said, but not the way I did, not like I'm stuck in it. Georgia nodded, not offering comfort, just understanding. I keep thinking, he went on, that grief is like winter. You don't fight it, you wait it out, but I didn't expect spring to feel like this. Her throat tightened. Like what? Like standing next to someone who makes it easier to breathe. Neither of them moved. Then Bonnie's voice floated through the window, calling for her father. The moment passed, but it didn't break. Cooper gave a quiet nod and slipped inside. Georgia stayed out a while longer, watching the barn lantern flicker in the distance. The colt would ride clean in the morning. The land was softening. And something inside her, long buried beneath years of being looked past, was beginning to rise. She wasn't just filling a space on this ranch. She was carving her place into it. The buyer from Helena arrived 2 days early, just after dawn, his wagon wheels deep in ruts from the melted snow and his coat dark with trail dust. He was a thin man with a sharp beard and a sharper voice, and though he never said it outright, Georgia could tell he hadn't expected a woman to lead the colt out for the showing. Cooper said nothing about it. He leaned on the corral gate, arms crossed, letting her work. Georgia didn't perform. She didn't need to. She mounted the colt with ease, guiding him through a slow circle, then a steady trot, then a smooth stop that had the buyer's mouth drawn tight with reluctant approval. Afterward, Cooper handed her a strip of jerky and nodded once toward the barn. "He'll pay the price we named." She chewed slowly, wiping her hands on her trousers. "That one'll be good in open country. He's got a calm eye." Cooper gave a low hum. "You see things most folks miss." Georgia leaned against the stall post, her shoulder brushing his. "I reckon I've had enough time being overlooked to know how not to do it." He turned to her then, not just with his face, but fully like whatever held him back before had loosened. "I've been thinkin'," he said, voice rough from the cold air. "The far pasture's gone to seed. I want to bring it back this season. Fencing's poor, soil's rough, but with the right hands it could turn again." Georgia watched dust drift in the light through the barn slats. "It'd take careful work, not just muscle," he nodded once. "That's why I want you on it, full say." "Your way." She looked up at him, slow and searching. "You're not offering out of kindness." "No," he said. "I'm offering because this place is better with you in it." They didn't speak for a long moment, just the horses shifting in the stalls, the creak of wood settling in the cold. Then Georgia said, "If I take that pasture, it means I'm not passing through." "I'm hoping you're not," Cooper said. The next morning she walked the boundary of the far field, a coil of rope at her belt and a notebook from the kitchen drawer tucked under one arm. Bonnie followed her, carrying a tin pail with nails that clinked together as she walked. "Papa says you're good with land," the girl said, hopping over a patch of dried thistle. "He say that, did he?" He said, "You see what it can be, not just what it is." Georgia knelt by the fence post and pressed her palm to the earth. "Sometimes you have to believe something's still alive under the rough." Bonnie crouched beside her. "Can I help fix it?" Georgia smiled without looking away from the ground. "If you're willing to do it right, no shortcuts." "I don't like shortcuts," Bonnie said. By dusk, Georgia's fingers were blistered and her knees caked in mud. Cooper met her halfway up the trail, holding 2 mugs of hot water laced with pine needles and a slice of dried apple. "You look like you fought the pasture and lost." She took the mug, warmth seeping into her palms. "It's wild in places, but there's promise." He tilted his head, eyes steady. "So's this house. So's this life." The words settled between them, heavier than the wind. She didn't answer, but she stayed close as they walked back, their shoulders brushing with each step. Inside, she helped Ben wash behind his ears and tucked him beneath the quilt, his round face finally untroubled by dreams. Later, as the fire burned low, Cooper stepped into the kitchen where she was scribbling notes by lantern light. "Stay with us," he said. Georgia didn't look up. "I already am." "I don't mean the work," he said. "I mean stay in the way that matters." She set her pencil down slowly and turned to face him. "I've never been someone folks asked to stay," she said. "Always someone they'd let go without much fuss." "I'm not most folks," Cooper said. "No," she whispered. "You're not." He crossed the room with quiet steps and took her hand, calloused fingers closing around hers like they were meant to be there. "No rush, no question. I want this to be your home too," he said. She stood, her height meeting his without apology, and looked into his eyes until no doubt remained. "It already is," she said. He bent his head and she met him halfway. The kiss wasn't hurried. It was warm and certain, like the land thawing beneath their feet. Outside, the wind had calmed. The last frost was breaking. And inside, something long buried, something worth keeping, had finally taken root. By late April, the pasture had begun to soften under Georgia's hands. She moved through it with quiet certainty, marking the boundary with new stakes, coaxing the stubborn soil into giving. Wild rye pushed through in places, and the creek that cut along the edge had swollen just enough to feed the roots without flooding the low ground. She worked from sunup to supper, and each day ended with her returning to the house with mud on her boots and a steadiness in her chest she hadn't known before. One evening, after the supper dishes had been dried and the children tucked in with their usual nest of bedtime questions, Cooper stepped out back with 2 chairs and a wool blanket thrown over one arm. "Sky's clear," he said. "Thought you might want to sit a while. Rest your shoulders." Georgia followed him into the yard. The air had turned cool again, though the frost had long since gone. They settled beside one another, the blanket shared between them, and watched the stars come on one by one. "Ben said he wants to grow up to build wagons," Cooper said, his voice low. "Says wheels make more sense than horses." "Smart boy," Georgia answered. "Less likely to get kicked." He chuckled, then quieted. "You think about what you want to do next." She folded her hands in her lap. "I want to finish the pasture, get real roots down in it, maybe run a few head of my own if you don't mind sharing space." His hand found hers beneath the blanket, warm and certain. "I was hoping you'd say something like that." She turned to him. "And you? I want us to build something deeper than just a place to sleep and eat. I want to raise my children with someone who sees them, not just feeds them, and I want to come in at the end of a long day and know you'll be there." Georgia didn't look away. "I've never had that kind of wanting pointed at me before." "You've got it now," he said. "And I'm not going anywhere." They sat quiet for a while longer, the stars above them and the soft sounds of the prairie settling for the night. Then he stood and held out his hand. "I've got something to show you." She took it, following him to the barn. He unlatched the side door and led her inside, where a small pen had been cleared near the back. A pair of lambs blinked up at them, their wool still patchy, eyes bright. Bonnie picked them out at the neighbor's last week. "Said we needed something soft around here." Georgia knelt beside the pen and scratched one behind the ear. "It's good land for sheep," she said. "Cool in summer, safe from wind." "That's what I thought," Cooper said. "But I'd rather you take him on, your name on the brand." "Your say?" She looked up at him. "Why?" "Because this place is only whole with you in it, not just as help, not even just as family, as partner." Georgia stood slowly. "You mean that?" "I mean every word," he said. "Marry me, Georgia, not for the house or the children. For the life we can build." Her breath caught, but she didn't hesitate. "Yes." They married under the cottonwoods in early June. The pasture bloomed with wildflowers that hadn't shown themselves in years, and the fence line held firm under new posts and careful hands. Bonnie wore a crown of woven grass. Ben carried the rings in a velvet pouch Cooper had kept from his mother's things, and the neighbors came with pies, preserves, and quiet smiles. Georgia wore a dress the color of wheat at harvest and walked barefoot to the shaded grove where Cooper waited. No preacher, just promises spoken clear, and a kiss that sealed them into something neither of them would ever question again. By summer's end, the sheep had doubled. The far pasture grew thick and green, and Cooper carved a new sign to hang above the barn doors. It read, Jennings and Dale. Bonnie learned to ride bareback. Ben built a wagon from leftover timber and pulled it with the lambs until they tired of it. Georgia taught them both how to read maps and measure weather by the sky. Cooper's limp eased with the warmth, and he worked beside her each day, their rhythm so natural it hardly needed words. They built a life that held. A life full of long evenings, shared work, and a kind of trust that stayed steady through storm, drought, or silence. Georgia never left again, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she had found everything she needed right there. And every night, as the wind passed through the cottonwoods and the stars blinked back into place, she lay next to the man who had opened the door and let her in without question. They were not perfect people, but they had chosen one another. And that choice, made each day in quiet ways, was what made it home. They were happy, and they stayed that way.